Welcome back. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has escalated. Despite some hopeful signs that an agreement of some sorts may be on the cards, many are looking into the words of a Russian representative recently. Meanwhile, at the Vatican, the Pope has called for an end to the conflict. The Russian military attack on Ukraine's military training center and the killing of civilians has drawn strong criticism from around the world. In Russia, some have been arrested for protesting against the war. In Europe, many more took to the streets to protest against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Ukrainians continue to leave the country, neighboring countries experiencing those high numbers of refugees coming in, with the UN concerned about a growing humanitarian crisis. Let's focus on the Russian missiles that hit a large Ukrainian base, a military base near the border with NATO member Poland, killing 35 people and wounding 134, according to the latest reports. Britain said the incident, just 25 kilometers from the Polish border, marked a significant escalation of the conflict. To get the latest, we speak to SABC Correspondent in Brussels, Rosie Birchard. Thank you for being with us, Rosie. So this attack very close to Poland is being seen as a symbolic, strategic move from Russia. What more can you tell us?
Absolutely. This is certainly, sorry, Francis, raising concerns here in Brussels. That's because NATO, the defensive alliance, is headquartered here, and Poland is a member of NATO, unlike Ukraine. Now, this attack being so close to the Polish border means that that's not only the border through which most refugees are fleeing Ukraine, it also marks the beginning of NATO territory and the beginning of that collective defence pledge known as Article 5, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. So this is certainly being seen, at least here in Brussels, as something that could be considered as escalatory and is raising concerns here because, of course, NATO until now has extremely been resistant toward any sort of involvement in this war, and that's why they have, for example, turned down Ukraine's request to initiate a no-fly zone over the country. The NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says doing so could lead to an even bigger war where NATO allies, including the United States and the United Kingdom, are facing down Russia, and that, he says, would lead to a bigger war with even greater human suffering.
Yeah. The Prime Minister of the UK says European security is shaken. Is that the general view? I guess Article 5, however, is not triggered until something lands within Polish territory.
Francis, you're quite right. Article 5 has absolutely not been triggered. What has been requested, at least in the last few weeks, is something called Article 4 consultations in NATO. Poland was among several countries requesting that, and that essentially says we feel our security is threatened. Not just that there's a distant threat, but that there is a threat to security. Now, NATO defence ministers will be meeting in Brussels on Wednesday. They will be meeting in person. However, they're not likely to be discussing any kind of direct support to Ukraine. As I said, they keep insisting there will be no NATO boots on the ground and no NATO planes in the skies. They are instead likely to be discussing how best to protect each other and how to really make sure that those allies who are on the eastern flank and who feel very exposed at this time feel secure.
Yeah, the Ukrainian president always calling for that no-fly zone, which won't happen anytime soon, like you say. There are attempts. We're hearing some softening of the rhetoric, even of the Russian president. People looking into the words he's been using, and a Russian representative reportedly saying there could be some sort of agreement on the cards. Do you have anything more to tell us? Are there hopeful signs?
Well, I can tell you, at least from the European perspective, the last EU leaders to have tried their hand at convincing Russian President Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire were French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. They were juggling the phones yesterday. They were on the phone to Vladimir Putin and before that on the phone to Volodymyr Zelensky. They did call for this immediate ceasefire. Now, given the events that we just spoke about with those strikes on that military facility near Poland, that call for a ceasefire does appear to have fallen on deaf ears. However, we did see earlier this week that first meeting of those foreign ministers from Ukraine and Russia, first time they'd met face to face since the conflict began, and the talks do appear to be moving forward in the sense that they are continuing. Whether or not there's any progress in there is hard to say. I'm afraid I'm not privy to that information. However, European Union and NATO officials both say they absolutely support a diplomatic solution. They support these talks going forward, and that is what they are absolutely pushing for.
And do they say they will simply keep on trying? I mean, the French president has been on the phone a lot, no fruit yet, but are they committed to continuing to try to reach out to the Russian president?
Well, we heard from the readouts of this call yesterday that the leaders had agreed to stay in touch, so it seems that those diplomatic efforts will continue. Francis, you mentioned French President Macron. He has long been seen as an advocate of dialogue with Russia, and of course he himself had been in the Russian capital before this war started to try and broker some sort of deal. That didn't seem to work out. As you said, those talks so far have not seemed to be able to bear fruit, but the efforts do continue, and they seem to be willing to try and keep them up and keep pressing for a diplomatic solution, however unlikely or difficult that might be.
All right, thank you for that update, SABC correspondent in Brussels for us, Rosie Birchard.